Hello, everyone. Welcome to As the CMMC Churns. Hopefully you can hear me, Jack. If not, please let me know in chat. I'm Matt Titcomb, the CEO of Peak InfoSec, an authorized CMMC third-party assessor organization. I'm also a CMMC provisional assessor. Today's episode is CMMC Training on the Cheap for SMBs. And this is also live. So one day we'll do a As the CMMC Churns bloopers. And also, as we go through this, please feel free to ask questions in the comments, and I'm going to answer them at the end as we get through this. So I'm going to start up front with a warning. And the warning up front is that fundamentally what we're going to talk about is going to adequately meet your compliance requirements. Now, that being said, some of these are going to retain and move on into your mature information security program. But professionally, I'm going to have to say they're really not sufficient to keep an information security professional prepared, or you actually realistically a non-information security professional prepared. It also doesn't keep your staff exercised with phishing campaigns. So you want to add these in as we walk through this. So be thinking about what comes after this. Now, professionally, we do recommend using curated content from SANS, KnowBe4 et al. SANS actually does have CUI training, so it's kind of an interesting something you can look at. And we do highly encourage supplementing with phishing training exercises. As you know, phishing is about 98% of the attacks that everybody's going to suffer from. And the more you can keep your organization ready for phishing, the better off you are. Now, let's also talk something else about the awareness and training family. There are a lot of tripping hazards in the awareness and training family that you do need to be aware of. There's other things in here that there's the requirements, but there's also stuff you're going to be responsible for that you're going to have to complete. So when you see this "you're responsible" icon, that's me telling you you've got work to do here. Now, in the first requirement, our very first thing is you need to address your risks to handling CUI. That needs to be specific to your organization, the types of CUI, the way you're handling it, the potential ways it could get mishandled, etc. You're expected to have that covered in your training content. Now, likewise, your training should be addressing your policy, standards, and procedures and where to find them. We did get asked by DIBCAC, where is your stuff? How does an employee find that? So be ready for that. And that should be easily addressed in the training material that realistically you would provide the C3PO during your conformity assessment. Now, here's a big pitfall. Assessment objective Charlie is actually 3 requirements. So as 3 requirements, you actually need to have separate training for your managers, your system administrators, or what we refer to as really privileged users, and all users of the system. Be ready to break it down for Charlie to that level. Delta also then has the same requirement. So again, be ready to lay out all 3 of these when you're going through training, and that should also match against what you're internally doing and preparing for. Some of this will address with the training content we're providing you all. Other parts will, and I think, okay, sorry, I got distracted by comments. And so we'll address some of the things you can reuse, but a lot of this you're going to have to manage. Now, again, tripping hazard, there's 3 tiers to train: users, managers, and system administrators. The way we dealt with this with our assessment, and we recommend doing this with all of our clients, is treat system admins, privileged users, and security users the same. Make them all go through the same set of training requirements. Now, when it comes to actually 322, again, you need to define your security-related duties, roles, and responsibilities. That should be done in your SSP or other supporting documentation. Now, related to that will come what their training requirements are for those specific roles. And then you need to be able to track who's assigned to what role. Now, this is all just in the training realm. We're not even just talking the content, because now The content is really in Charlie, you've got to train them. And that's kind of your actions in this set of training requirements right here for 800-171 and CMMC. Now, all staff, tripping hazard here, must be trained before given access to CUI. If I'm looking at your onboarding process as an assessor and I see that you've given somebody access to CUI before you've trained them, party foul, that's a failure, and your actual limit 311 and this will both fail concurrently. So again, training must come before authorization and access. You can authorize a person, but before access is given, they must complete training. Now the third one is our insider threat training. Now, what we're looking at here is really the training content requirement. If you're doing your own custom training, you're going to have to address what those associated threats and indicators of compromise may be. Sometimes it's human behavior. You're seeing Johnny come in really late at night when he's really not supposed to be here. And yeah, weird human behavior. That's something that needs to be covered. Likewise, you need to make sure in Bravo, don't focus on the word employees. It's really a bad term they've got here, and hopefully we're going to get that corrected in revision 3 to 800-171. It really is anybody who has access to CUI is required to have an insider threat. Now, again, don't trip up on employees. That is a major area we've seen organizations fail on. Make sure everybody is trained and qualified on this. Now, the other thing that goes on in the awareness and training domain is there's a lot of hidden training requirements. Again, this is stuff you all need to do. Now, controlling information posted on or processed on publicly accessible information systems, typically we're talking about your website. Now, you need to train people. They need to know they just can't post things. They can't take a photo of something in the office and post it on their personal Facebook. This should also be something that's in your acceptable use policy. So again, this is something we're going to look for you to be training and making people aware of this requirement. Limiting portable storage on external systems. If you allow that USB device, you have to train your people because this is an administrative requirement that they cannot plug it into their personal computer. That's a violation. They cannot plug it into a client's computer. That's a violation unless they're explicitly authorized. Now, again, that's got to come from somebody with the approval to authorize that. Just not anybody can approve those types of decisions. But this is going to be a training requirement. It's also something that should be in your acceptable use policy. The entire change management is something you need to train your people on. They're not allowed to install software without going through the approval process, and they need to know how to submit things for your approval. And so you need to train on that change management set of practices. This is one that I've caused a couple CISOs to cry on. Now, we always typically think of, oh, I use Key Vault, I use this, and we use LastPass or KeyPass, etc., to store passwords. Yeah, so I'm kind of notorious, hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I look for training content that specifically says users are not allowed to store passwords in Word documents, etc. And I've made CISOs cry, but actually they've got rights. If just do a search for the word password in SharePoint as the global administrator, and you may start crying, and you'd be surprised how many IT people do this. You are not allowed to store passwords in files. That is a violation. And if you have no policies stopping that, and it happens, that's a violation. So be wary of that one. 375 multi-factor for non-local maintenance is something else you need to train. This is basically the classic Dell log me in type solution. Somebody's doing remote maintenance on your device, you need to make sure it's multi-factored, or you control that non-local remote maintenance session. So again, these are things that you need to think through and make sure people are trained on if they have the ability to do this. The use of portable storage devices. So if you find a USB stick in your conference room, what do you do? Got to train on that. Anomalous system behavior. This is actually one of the ones that's in the DIBCAC top 10. What's happening here is people are not being trained what to do when they detect something. So again, this is one of those things you need to train them. Who do they call? Who do they email? How do they escalate? That should be a part of your ongoing training materials and also incorporated within your acceptable use policy. Your CUI management plan. How are you marking, handling, and labeling? Now, this one, we can go for a lot of related CUI ones and media protection, etc. But this is all fundamentally around controlling the flow of CUI. Your people need to be trained on this. And you can't just solely depend upon the DoD provided training. Where do they find your templates? Where are authorized repos? Who do they contact if they have a question? If this is or is not CUI. Those are things you have to train for. Data leaks are another thing. We all receive CUI we shouldn't be receiving. We also potentially may be transmitting CUI we shouldn't be transmitting. When that happens, that's not necessarily breach, that's a data leak. Your incident response plan should have how you handle those two cases. However, people again need to know how do they notify whomever to take whatever corrective actions it should occur when CUI is either received or transmitted in an unauthorized manner. Lastly, visitors. Everybody must train on how you handle visitors. Why? You need to make sure everybody knows that if there's somebody in your building you don't recognize, they don't have a badge, etc., you should come and ask, or you should go get somebody to go find out who that person is. That is the right behavior. People should not be allowed to wander around your buildings where CUI is present unmanaged unless they are trusted guests and they've been verified that they have access. Again, that's a whole separate procedure, but best practices, train everybody that if you don't know the person, make sure you take them up to the front lobby to be picked up by whoever's supposed to be maintaining them. And there we go. So let's actually talk the CMMC training resources that you can use on the cheap to meet your requirements. The first three, you need to develop your own training. You have your own internal training briefing. This has got to be done annually. You have your supplemental internal training briefing for privileged users. Again, annually. You have an internal training briefing for managers. Again, annually. You're going to start getting the hint on this annually thing. Now, DoD technically has mandatory training for CUI. It's not flowed down in any requirements. Probably something that's going to flow down in the new interim rule that gets published next year. However, take it. Make everybody take it. It will solve every one of these questions for this part of your security compliance requirements around CUI marking and handling. Now, we also recommend that organizations supplement that by also taking the NARA training. They're somewhat duplicative, but they do reinforce. For us, that's a mandatory, but that's our role and our job. So it's something, it's optional within what you all want to do. We do recommend taking the cybersecurity awareness training. This one's again free. This is just a matter of walking through that and suffering through DoD provided, federally provided training. Now, there's also a U.S. Learning Insider Threat Training. This will cover the insider threat training requirement, the fundamental level, and it covers everything very well. Since everybody here is dealing with DoD information, we do recommend, if you're working on DoD contracts, going ahead and taking the DoD Annual Security Awareness Refresher. Now, again, this kind of keeps you up to date, lets you know what DoD is thinking for all of your employees and staff. This is also a great way to make sure if you're dealing with a DIBCAC audit, they're going to check off and sign off. Yep, you're covering everything we have to suffer with, so they're happy. Now, the next two requirements are specialized. They're not meant for all staff. Now, unauthorized disclosure of classified and controlled unclassified information is actually a publicly available training we do recommend that all privileged users have to take: system admins, privileged users, and security users. They're typically going to be involved in dealing with incidents. Likewise, we do recommend managers take that. Now, does every manager need to take it? No. What we recommend is everybody who's a manager, i.e. HR, who's involved in an incident response team, take that training. A lot of it's pretty much in the weeds, and it may take a couple times to get through. It passes on some non-technical people, but it really does help them to kind of understand some of the things that you may have to deal with when it comes to these incidents when they occur. Now, that's also, as you see in that far right column, those are requirements that are going to be applicable to any large firm. You go out, you go get SANS, you go get KnowBe4, you still have to do these things. So don't forget that. The last one on here is, how do you train your privileged users? Now, what we recommend is DoD has provided a privileged user cybersecurity responsibilities training. Meets the requirement, checks it off. You still have to supplement, again, with your own internally developed content, but it really does give you the ability to use these resources to meet both managers, privileged users, and staff whenever they're actually using your information systems. Now, as we go through this, we've talked about training, we've talked about being annual. Again, annual is going to be something, as an assessor, we're going to be looking for. That's a requirement. And unfortunately, it's not always fun to go through this every year. It pretty much sucks. I went through it all the time when I was active duty, and then as a government employee in the Air Force. So let's just go ahead and sum up on training. Don't settle for this adequacy. Protect your people and business. Invest in SANS, KnowBe4, whomever, and especially invest in phishing training. That's going to be your best bang for the buck for training and getting out of this. Now, as you've noticed, awareness and training surprisingly has a lot of hidden tripping hazards. You need to be aware of them, make sure you're covering them, especially as you're preparing for your C3PO assessment. Now, you still do have to develop your own internal training for your unique isms. It's not hard. We've got templates. When we're helping clients to remediate, we work through it and then tailor it to them. And then typically we'll sit down with senior leadership and help to provide that training. Now, leverage what's available for free. I don't care how big you are or how small you are. There's components on this list that you can reuse as long as they're available. And there are some you're going to have to continue to reuse. So leverage it, but don't settle. Remember, one of the things we talked about annually, the real reason is in the CMMC glossary, it defines annually or periodically as a time frame not to exceed 1 year. So all training must be done annually. And anytime somebody new comes in, out of cycle, again, they must complete training before given access to CUI. Now, as you're going through this process, make sure you're capturing everyone's training certs and maintaining them in their employee folders. As an assessor, I will be asking for those training certs, proof that they're taking those training. It's tedious. They just get converted to either snapshot into a Word doc and sent to HR. You can save most of these as a PDF. Again, send to HR and make sure your process is accounting that training certs are received and they've completed their training for all of your requirements before you actually move on and give anybody access to CUI. Now, coming up as we're moving live with CMMC, as the CMMC Churns, this is our schedule coming up. On 1 December, we're going to be talking about how to apply the scope of applicability. 8 December is going to be talking about how do you take things out of scope. And there are actually 3 methods. People forget the third one. December 15th, we're going to talk about implementing CMMC. And December 22nd will be 'Twas the Night Before the Final Rule, a special Christmas reading for CMMC. So I'm Matt Titcomb. Thanks for joining us for the CMMC Churns. And I'm going to go ahead and move over to answering any comments that have come in. And as of right now, I don't see any comments. Looks like we're doing good in there. If anybody has any comments or questions, feel free to ask. Seeing some happy clapping hands, thank you very much. And we'll go ahead and wrap this up now. Thank you all again for joining us for As the CMMC Churns. We'll see you in 2 weeks after Thanksgiving.